Hello, this is Ultra Titan Z, and this is my explanation for Godzilla's personality shift in the Monsterverse, which could alternatively be titled my convoluted attempt to prove that he maintains his role as a protector, using facts and logic, which is semi-headcanon, ignoring the fact that this is really just because of directorial changes based on how they believe Godzilla should be portrayed, and all of this is just fan conjecture. This wasn't something that really bothered me that much before, but the more I've been absorbing Monsterverse content and witnessing fan discourse, it's very hard to not think about Godzilla's personality at this point in time. Out of all the aspects of the Monsterverse, Godzilla might be the most inconsistent part of it. I actually think, for the most part, Monsterverse is pretty good at carrying over things from all the media and stuff. Later stuff will go back and fix any continuity errors. So overall, it's pretty solid. If you don't look super deep into it, but we're talking about the mainline movies here, and I mean you could include the other stuff if you want, but Godzilla's, I think the comics are pretty valid. Obviously, the movies are the main thing, then the TV show, then the comics. The novelizations are kind of up to you. They're kind of different. I haven't read them all yet, so we'll see if that. We're not talking about the novelizations. That's a whole separate thing. So yeah, I wanted to settle. I'm really doing this for myself. If you have a different opinion, that's fine. If you agree with me, that great. But this is just me kind of trying to explain how all of this makes sense in my head and putting it to words. So I feel like I'm kind of writing a history paper because I'm using one source proportionally more than the others, because it just makes my point but better. Shout out to D-Man 1954 there. Not even a primary source. We're talking about a secondary source here. But I did go back to everything and kind of, look at scenes and, dialogue and, it's not like I rewatched the movies for this. Just kind of went back to get the overview, and I think I've been able to kind of come to a conclusion for myself here. So there's somewhat of a war within Monsterverse media between the interpretation of the Titans as animals in an ecosystem versus a kingdom with a social hierarchy. Personally, I lean more towards the side of the, large animals, but I do, some vague, kingdom undertones, which, it's not literal, more metaphorical. So, I like the more apex predator angle for viewing Godzilla over the, the alpha or the king. Obviously, if that's metaphorical, that's fine. But, when we start to treat that like it means something that separates Godzilla immensely from all these other Titans, then, we get into a bit of murky waters there. I just think it's more in line with the themes of the Monsterverse. Now, Godzilla versus Kong, I don't think has that many. This is when, Adam Wingard's shift for Godzilla really begins, and there's not like too much here that's crazy and lore breaking. Obviously, it might seem weird for Godzilla to be like so like angry at Kong for no reason, but I just think his ancestral hatred for Kong is so strong that it overrides any reason he has, which it's somewhat mutual. Kong kind of has that feeling too. I think Kong kind of gets over it by the end of the movie, but I think Godzilla's still a bit wary, and that's factors into why he gets so mad in the next movie. And then the only other thing we really have is the destruction of Hong Kong, but I think that, he's looking for the Apex facility. So I don't it's not it really doesn't change Godzilla's character that much. It's more so New Empire is when we really get into a lot of these decisions. Now, Scylla's an opportunistic scavenger, so she's gonna go after whatever she can, and it's usually, a source of radiation that if she consumes will probably endanger, human populations in some way. And she poisons water sources wherever she goes, which I feel like isn't brought up enough because that seems really like dangerous. I mean, obviously people bring up the theory that Bernie said that she might be preparing to reproduce. But I feel like that's brought up more so to continue the Godzilla hates single mothers meme. Of course, I still think it's a valid reason. I just think people acknowledge it for different reasons than I do. So she's poisoning water supplies, she's going to have babies, and just causing a lot of general damage in addition to probably causing some sort of nuclear fallout. Now, of course, that's enough for Godzilla to fight her off, but what makes this significant is that she's a repeat offender. So she's already kind of upsetting the balance of the ecosystem, and she's not going to stop because that's just how she survives. And if she has babies, then that could cause even more chaos. The world isn't ready for one Scylla, so who knows how many more she'd birth into the world, and that would cause even more problems. Ultimately, Scylla just doesn't fit in the modern world, and what we see from Godzilla is somewhat of a mercy killing. Though, I mean, if you look at the fight, he appears very angry and primal, but, that's just kind of how the king is. Little bit of a side note here, this is more of a headcanon, but it could be plausible, is that Godzilla kept his home that he'd previously taken from the rival in Godzilla Dominion, and that Rome is just a temporary sleeping spot. Moving on to Tiamat, we of course know that Godzilla needed to get her out of the way so he could get in her lair and get an extreme power-up for the oncoming fight. It's understandable that people would be so upset with her death after only a brief appearance, but if we need to provide more evidence aside from the vague notion of being a destroyer, she has been historically antagonistic towards humans. From Monsterverse Declassified, we can see that very clearly throughout all of history, and even in Kong's Survivor Instinct, we see her attacking, specifically one human. I mean, David's just standing there, and she goes right for him, and it seems like such a pointless behavior to go after, one tiny little guy, but, that's just kind of how she is, and she's intensely territorial. Which again is also very present. She takes over a home and she's gonna defend that to the end, right? So even though she was kind of minding her own business, it's not necessarily a tragedy that she was taken out, since she's known to be incredibly dangerous. This is a bit more headcanon-y, but there could be some property of Tiamat's energy that was part of what enraged Godzilla, which will be our segue into our segment on Kong. I'll admit I'm not a fan of Godzilla's equal hostility towards Kong to what he had in GVK, but I think we can still explain it away. He does act more careful, Godzilla, at points in the film. You know, we get to see parts of his personality peek through there, but a lot less so when Kong is involved. He's a lot more angry. When Kong gets up to the surface and roars, Godzilla, still feeling that vitriol towards Kong, sees that as a breach of contract and that he needs to stay in his lane. And because of that uneasy relationship, he's still very easy to enrage. Because even though when Godzilla shows up and Kong is like shown to be submitting, he hadn't previously, which echoes a repeat offender like Scylla, who had submitted to Godzilla, but would inevitably go back to her old ways. I've also read a theory about Godzilla smelling Scar King's scent on him, which admittedly just sounds better and is way simpler than what I came up with. It's just that there isn't much, it's not like there's really support for that, but I think it is a valid theory to hold. Now, Godzilla's so enraged, he's already causing a bunch of collateral damage on the way to encounter Kong, and when he finally gets to Kong, he chooses to attack even though he's submitting, possibly because he smells that scent. So I do like how that one sounds. So that's kind of my take on Godzilla's current state in the Monsterverse. I think it's incredibly valid to criticize how his character has been handled, because I love the Wingard movies, but they've made a lot of his more recent actions come off as hypocritical and sloppy. I'm not a huge fan of attaching human traits to Titans, even if they have a higher level intelligence, but Godzilla does come off a lot more mean and ruthless than he was originally portrayed, and more mean and ruthless than we might expect an animal in an ecosystem to act. But that's my attempt at explaining Godzilla's actions and personality shift in the context of the Monsterverse. That's all for now. See you guys in the next one. Goodbye.